Hey, P-Psych, I am super excited for today's lecture. It is all about brain weirdness. This is not an official College Board title. This is just my made-up title for some of the fascinating things that our brain does. So let's get right to it. Learning targets about the brain. There's a lot, same as the last lecture. Let's go. Okay, a real easy thing to learn, I think it's pretty easy to learn, is that all of this comes from the result of cognitive neuroscience. This is the study of brain activity linked with its mental processes. So how does the fact that right now I am thinking about my desire to have pizza connects to like this idea that I'm thinking about food actually makes certain parts of my brain light up? Because through MRIs, CAT scans, EEGs, all those things, we have determined that brains can be read, and we can read your mind. Certain areas of the brain react when thinking of things like a certain movement, like waving my hand will make my brain light up in a certain way. If I'm thinking about how much I love Mr. Ruskowitz, my brain will light up in a different way. So my thoughts are actually reflected in, or not reflected, are indicated in the mushy stuff of my gray and white matter. So how can this idea of something like love that isn't actually tangible show itself in our brains? Through cognitive neuroscience, through studying our brains in that way. Okay, let's get a couple basic points out of the way here. Our hemispheres, they are nearly mirror images of each other. So our left and our right brains look almost identical, right down to things like the amygdala, hippocampus, all of that stuff. They share information, so they communicate through the corpus callosum. This is a little bit repetitive, but we've got to refresh our brains on some of these terms before I keep going. Or if we don't know these terms, the rest of the stuff will make even less sense than it might already. Brain lateralization is the idea that our certain hemispheres, left or right, specialize in certain functions. That is true. Our hemispheres do specialize, but the idea that someone is left-brained or right-brained, or that one dominates the other, that is wrong. It is, or at least it is grossly exaggerated in pop science today. I won't say pseudoscience because there's something to it. It's just exaggerated. Individuals need and use both sides of our brain. So they look alike, their structures are alike, generally their functions are alike, and we need and use both sides of our brain all the time for everything. That being said, there is some lateralization, there is some specializations of the hemispheres. The left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, so like your motor neurons on the right side. The left hemisphere also specializes in language. Remember, left hemisphere, language. So if you make that little L with your hand, hopefully that'll help. Verbal memories and arithmetic. Your right hemisphere controls the left side of your body, the movement of the left side of your body, and it can identify things like faces, nonverbal cues, and spatial ability. In case you don't know what that means, I'm going to give you a couple examples of each of these. You do not need to write them all down, so just fit in what you'd like. Here is, so if you've got the little thought bubbles on your paper, this is where I would put this. The left hemisphere, when we're speaking of vision, our occipital lobe, the left hemisphere recognizes words and letters, the right, geometric patterns, faces, and emotional expressions. So those expressions I'm just making, you can recognize with your right side. The words I'm saying, you're more recognizing with your left side. Or reading, because it's vision. Reading. When you hear it, it's the same thing. Language sounds are picked up on the left side. Non-language sounds, such as music or like a bird chirping, are picked up on the right side. You hold your verbal memories on the left side. So something you've read, something you heard, like with words you heard, something someone said, that tends to be on your left hemisphere. And non-verbal memories, like associating where you were when you heard a song, or something you might have felt as it brushed past you, those are going to be held on the right side. Tone of voice is the right side. If someone is angry or someone's really happy and like kind of speaking a little bit squeaky, you're going to pick that up on your right side. Your left side of your brain is more responsive to actual speech, reading, writing, and arithmetic. So like the numbers in equations. However, your right side more like very dominates your spatial ability. So understanding geometry, not just algebra numbers on the page, but shapes and like what makes this a cylinder or what makes this a circle. So your mental rotation of shapes, like what does it look like if you hold something, a 3D thing in different positions, but also your sense of direction, which way is up, down, how far away, so distance. It says under my little face bubble here, it says distance. So how far away the ball is that you're about to catch or hit with that bat, or like how far it is to your house or a wall that's right next to you right now, that sort of thing. Okay, association areas. This is repetitive. Maybe you even remember this. I hope you even remember this from our last brain lecture. But oops, association areas are uncommitted areas of the cortex that are involved in higher mental functioning. So these are highly complex areas that involve both sensory and motor functions. And we're going to focus on two that involve language, because we need to be able to hear and perceive words, and we also need to be able to move our mouths to form words. And so we've got two association areas involved with that. Wernicke's area is in your left temporal lobe. So this is your temporal lobe. This is responsible for language comprehension and expression. So what words mean. Okay, so think of that. You're hearing it and then you are processing. What are the words that Miss Russ is saying right now? What does she mean by them? Or how do I form my thoughts so I can express myself to someone else in the right way? So meaning is on the temporal, the auditory, or dominated by the auditory side of your brain. Broca's area is in your left, again your left language, frontal lobe, because that holds your motor cortex. And that is the ability to move your mouth and your tongue and your teeth in certain ways to form words. These are both on the left side of your brain, but they both have different functions depending on where they are. This is important because sometimes these areas might get damaged in something like a stroke, and the results are something called aphasia. Aphasia, don't worry about these videos. We'll watch a whole bunch of videos demonstrating all this stuff in class. Aphasia, come on. There it is. Aphasia is the loss of ability to understand or express speech due to brain damage. It could be trauma, but most often it has to do with stroke. If your Wernicke's area is damaged, so your temporal lobe, your understanding what people are saying, also has to do with understanding or trying to process what you want to express, this is considered fluent aphasia. So when you can't understand words. Damage to Broca's area is considered non-fluent aphasia, and this is when you can't form the words. So let me give you a quick example, and then we're going to do a lot more in class with this. So just take my example right now, do some surface understanding. We'll dig deeper when we are in class. So if you have Wernicke's aphasia, you might say a sentence like, you know that Smoodle Pinkard and that I want to get him round and take care of him like you want before. If you know the context of what someone is saying, and you know that person well, you might be able to figure out what they mean. But just as a general sentence, that sentence does not make sense. The person is having trouble with comprehension, with using the right words. They can say words, but they can't use them in the right way that makes a clear meaning. Someone who's got Broca's area might say something like, walk dog, meaning walk the dog. Or 2 books table might mean there are 2 books on the table. So they have trouble with some of those basic words. They probably will speak slow and often stutter quite a bit. All right, so moving on to some of the more kind of out of this world things, like out of this world in terms of like, I couldn't believe it that our brain is this impressive when I was learning about it. It's also just kind of a quick break in all of these fascinating things that our brain does. Okay, one of the very fascinating things is the concept of brain plasticity, that our brains can adapt and change over time, also known as neuroplasticity. So our brain has the ability to change throughout our life due to use. So the idea that if you don't use it, you lose it is true. If you are playing an instrument, if you play a sport, if you speak a foreign language, and then you stop, your brain will lose that ability to do it. However, if you practice and you do those drills at your basketball practice, or you use the flashcards for studying for psych, or you practice that violin over and over again, the more you do something, these neural pathways will add new synapses and dendrites, improving the connections between your neurons, making that a smoother, faster, stronger pathway. At the same time, brain activity in one area of your brain, so let's say it's on the left side, could transfer to a different location on the other side, especially if that original location is damaged. We will see an example of a little girl who does not have an entire side of her brain. Whole half of her brain is gone, but yet she can still talk, move, use her hands, everything. Because this happened to her when she was little and her brain was still forming, the functionality of one side of the brain moved over to the other. This is thanks to brain plasticity. Neurogenesis is another really impressive function of our brains. Unfortunately, it's not one that we have really mastered yet artificially. So neurogenesis is the ability of the brain to generate new neurons. Your brain has this to an extent. So not just new connections, but or synapses or dendrites, but a full new neuron. We have seen some evidence that if people keep learning or keep active and have exercise releasing endorphins, you might be able to increase the development of new neurons. However, we have more evidence that this is decreased by age and stress. And so as you get older, or if you are in a really stressful time of your life, like living through a pandemic, it might be harder for your brain to generate new connections or new neurons. We know that this is very limited in humans after birth. So if you do sustain some sort of brain damage when you're young, you have a much better chance of your brain bouncing back to fully functional than if it were to happen to you as an adult. Again, really good evidence for staying active in terms of physical activity and even just mental activity as you age. So even as you become elderly, it's really important to get out and move every day, do crossword puzzles, Sudokus, whatever sort of things to keep your mind active. Okay, I want to talk about split brain procedure. This is the most complicated topic in this lecture. We're going to really just focus on getting the notes down in here, and I will explain it a lot more in class because this one's a tricky one, but it's probably the one that blew my mind the most when I first learned about it. Like, I knew nothing of this before my introduction to psychology. So here we go. Split brain procedure. In a surgical procedure, the corpus callosum is cut. This is only done in severe epilepsy cases. So if you have epilepsy, generally that means you have seizures. They can be mild, but in some people they can be extremely severe. So severe that if they were to fall and start thrashing around, they could hurt themselves, break bones, hurt other people, that sort of thing. In those cases, it might be medically necessary to have that corpus callosum be surgically cut. Those two hemispheres are completely independent, and yes, they are connected down into the spinal cord, but they are not connected to each other anymore. What this has allowed scientists or cognitive neuroscientists to do is to study lateralization. So that idea of how much does the left hemisphere really focus on language and how much does the right hemisphere really focus on those visual cues and shapes and things like that. Again, I'm going to teach this much more in depth in class. Oh, one more thing. Two psychologists, you do need to know these names, Sperry and Gazzaniga. We're going to see a video. These guys are going to be mentioned. You'll hear their names properly, but do write them down right now. Corpus callosum, here we go. So there are some conclusions. We're going to jump right to the conclusions that can be drawn by the fact that this has been a successful procedure. The hows, again, we'll get into more in class, but here are the conclusions. The hemispheres can operate independently. You can cut the corpus callosum and you can still live, breathe, walk, talk, play, paint, all that stuff. So your hemispheres are capable of operating without talking to each other. It's not ideal, but it is possible. And this is where it gets really complicated. You might be thinking so far so good, but this is where it gets messy. In a split brain person, if we know that the right hemisphere specializes in visual spatial ability, things like that, and symbols and whatnot, visually, there's no connection to this side. If you show something to someone with split brain, their right hemisphere can recognize that object in their left visual field. Right brain controls your left side. That left side then recognizes something visually. At the same rate, again, a split brain person, if you show something to their right visual field, it's going to talk to their left hemisphere, and remember, left is language. So then you would be able to speak and say what that thing is. So let's say cup. If I split my brain and I am seeing this with my left visual field, it is going to the right side of my brain. And so my right side of my brain could draw a picture of a cup. I can't say it because left is language, but on my right side of the brain, I would at least be able to visualize, draw a picture with my left hand, because that's being controlled by this side of the brain. I could draw a picture of a cup. At the same time, if this is shown to my right visual field, going to my left brain, I could say the word cup. Okay. If you did not follow that, no problem. It took me like 10 times going over this to understand it. So you know how when you see someone get hurt, like maybe a football player get a hard tackle, or you see some blooper reel and someone steps on a board and it jumps up and smashes them in the face and you go, ooh. When you wince and someone gets hurt, or when you go up to a baby and you say, hi baby, and you clap your hands and then they smile and clap back at you. Or when someone eats something that you don't like tonight when my husband ate an onion, and I went, ew, gross, I can't believe you just eat those. Or when you watch a romance movie and you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, or you cry at something really sad, or when your favorite team loses a game, all of those things are a result of mirror neurons. And I'll come back to this monkey picture in just a second. Mirror neurons are frontal lobe neurons that fire when observing others performing an action. So this is an indication of a human's social nature. Okay, the fact that we actually have neurons in our brain that make it possible for us to imitate someone else or empathize with someone else, like, oh man, I totally know what that must have felt like. I can totally imagine how that must have felt. This is also the basis of observational learning. So we learn by seeing someone else do something. So we can just watch someone over and over practice, hitting that baseball. And I'm not saying we're going to be great at it, but we can get a pretty good idea of you hold it like this and you move it like that. So when you're little, the very first time you pick up a bat, you know how to do this because you've seen other people do it. No one is taking that bat and that very first time holding your hand up and then doing that. Chances are you've seen someone else do it before. That's a mirror neuron. And I'll save that monkey reference. Here's a monkey, but we will talk about that in class. So there are a lot of videos in here. There's a lot of really cool real world examples that we will get to and we will talk through. And so I hope you found this as fascinating as I did. And if not, I hope to make it even more fascinating for you when we do have this class time to go over all this. So there's brain weirdness for you. I don't know about you, but my mind sure is blown.